Breaking news. Canon finally announced the Canon R1. It's real. I'm going to share the details that we have and give you my impressions of it. Also, Panasonic announced a teaser for a new Lumix camera that should be coming. We'll take a look at that teaser. Obviously, I'm traveling. I'm not in our traditional studio, but this is the traditional news. And we have our sponsor, Squarespace, to thank for making this possible. Squarespace.com/Tony is where you start whenever you have any personal project, business, anything you want to share on the web. The right place is no longer social media, which is using your pictures for AI training. It is putting ads in your space. No, you need your own space, your own custom domain. Like I have northrupphotography.com. Whether it's your photography or video reel, if it's a business that you're starting, a personal project you want to share with the world, make it look as good as possible by heading to squarespace.com/Tony today. The trial is completely free. But if you like it, the coupon code Tony will get you 10% off. Thanks for sponsoring us, Squarespace. The top story here is clearly the R1, but I do want to cover the Lumix teaser. There's a couple of weird things about the video. First, it's published on YouTube, but it's a vertical video. So to me, that's saying the camera is probably vertical. And there's a huge demand for this because, well, we all have vertical cameras already. It's the phone. And the way most people consume content now is on their phone, and people prefer to hold their phones vertically. And that's the success of apps like Instagram and TikTok, which are vertically oriented. But right now, literally every single camera produced is horizontal. It's held like this. If you use it for video, it's recorded like this. And yeah, you can turn things vertically, but everything gets a little awkward. Like the viewfinder's in a weird spot if you try to use it vertically. Look, you can put it vertically, but there's no tripod mount here, nor here, which means you need like a bracket, or you have a ball head tripod, which isn't traditional for video. Panasonic, it seems like they're finally giving us a vertical camera, and it's probably specifically for creators. We'll test that as soon as we can get our hands on it, so subscribe to see that, because there are some questions like, how does it autofocus? Is the image quality really better than you might get out of a phone? Panasonic has some challenges to address if they really want to take on this field. Now for our top story, which is the Canon R1 has finally been announced. It is really coming. Canon is saying this is finally their RF flagship, but it is so late because Sony announced their mirrorless flagship in January of 2021. Nikon launched the Z9 in December of 2021, though it wasn't really ready at the time. It took them a couple of years of firmware updates to really get it ready, in my opinion. Canon R1, Canon is now saying they're aiming for a 2024 release, meaning sometime before the end of 2024. So it could still be like another 7 months out, and that's the release date, not necessarily the ship date. So I'm guessing this probably won't ship until 2025. I don't actually feel like Canon is behind in technology, but they are definitely behind in releasing a flagship. And I think we all better be wowed by it, or we're going to be pretty disappointed, because the next generation of Z9 and A1 must be just around the corner. This new R1 doesn't need to compete against the current A1 and Z9. It needs to compete against the next ones. Here's some things that Canon said about it. They said it has strong durability and high reliability. That was the most prominent part of it. And you have to realize this is a top-end sports camera. This is not a camera necessarily for wildlife photographers. This is a camera for working professionals who need to be able to literally throw their camera when there's an emergency. They need to be able to be caught in the rain. They need tons of battery life. They need to work in hot and cold. Professionals like that have some different requirements. So you're paying primarily for all of these things, not necessarily just for megapixels or autofocus or image quality. Canon also says it has a new CMOS sensor. So they're not just reusing the sensor in the Canon R3. Now, some people are interpreting this being a CMOS sensor, meaning that it's not a global shutter sensor, since a global shutter sensor would require some technology other than CMOS. And my impression is it's probably not a global shutter sensor, meaning it won't have an instantaneous readout, meaning it's still technically a rolling shutter sensor, but will probably read out very quickly, as does the current Canon R3. Now, this is in contrast to the Sony A9 Mark III, which is really the only camera in this category which has a global shutter. And when we tested it side by side with the Canon R3 and the Nikon Z9, I never appreciated the image quality benefits of the global shutter, but it did come with some downsides, like more noise and a higher base ISO, things I didn't like. So if Canon gave me an R1 and it wasn't a global shutter, but it had a fast enough readout like the R3 does and better image quality, well, I'd actually prefer that. I'm going to read a quote from their very dry press release. The new image processing system, composed of these processors and a new CMOS sensor, enables large volume of data to be processed at high speeds and delivers never-before-seen advancements in autofocus and other functions. What they're saying is better autofocus. And if you read out really fast from the sensor, you can get more little snapshots and you'll have a better chance of getting your subjects in focus. This is super important to sports photographers. Though clearly pros are getting it done with the current suite of cameras, any refinements to the autofocus are going to just be that, refinements, slight improvements. Another quote, in team sporting events where multiple subjects intersect, the target subject can continually be tracked even if another player passes directly in front of them. This is really important. Shooting sports myself, you kind of get used to letting off the AF on button when somebody else runs in front of the person you're tracking and then pressing it again once your person is visible. At the same time, that is a solution that has worked out fine for me, but shooting cameras like the A9 Mark III that can track people moving in front of other people, it is convenient. It does help you get more shots, and that's something that's going to be meaningful for professionals. So I'm glad to see it, and it does require much more processing because you're actually tracking the entire person and their shape and tracking multiple people, and you could recognize when something disappears and comes back. So it is a higher level of thinking for the camera. Another quote, AF action priority function recognizes subject's movements by rapidly analyzing the subject's status. It determines the player performing a certain action, such as shooting a ball, as the main subject and instantly shifts the AF frame, thereby helping to capture decisive moments of gameplay. I'm not turned on by this. I don't think I need the camera's help to determine which of multiple players to focus on. Today, I deal with this by just usually having the center autofocus point linked to face and eye detect. I put the autofocus point on the player I want to focus on, and it finds the face and locks onto that subject until I let go of the AF on. That works fine for me. I generally don't like the camera to overthink things. If it sees a different player with what it thinks is the ball, I don't want it changing the autofocus point that I selected. So I'm sure this is going to be an option. I'm sure this is a feature that they're going to market as being easier, and maybe it would even help more beginner photographers. But I don't think this is really going to resonate with their audience because I don't think it fulfills an existing need. And based on the subject detection intelligence I've seen in other cameras, even like the first versions of the R5, when it gets it wrong and it latches onto something that is not what you want, it's extremely frustrating and has often led me to turn features off and instead just go with a single unintelligent autofocus point. One more quote. Canon implements the image noise reduction function, which has been previously developed as part of the software for PCs. You probably don't know this, but if you use Canon's terrible computer software, the Digital Photo Professional, I think they call it, you can subscribe for an extra fee and they will give you access to software that runs in your computer and does some extra noise reduction on your RAW files. And you probably didn't know that because I could not find a single person who used this software and liked it. I found a few people who paid for the subscription and tried it out and was like, why would I do this? I use Lightroom or Lightroom Classic, and Adobe has a great denoise feature, and I haven't even compared them side by side because nobody really cares about it. But Canon did develop the software for computers for post-processing, and now they're moving that into the camera's processing, and that means if you're using the R1 to shoot JPEG files, those high ISO JPEG files are going to look better, not because of improvements in sensor technology. We're kind of flatlined on sensor technology, but instead, better post-processing. You could get equivalent results or better results probably by shooting RAW and using denoise in Lightroom, but they're giving it to you in camera. And for the professional on the side of the field who's using a workflow where they instantly transfer files off to an editor for publication, that could be meaningful. It could also produce better lower light video, that same, if this feature is implemented in video, which they haven't clarified. So when's it going to be ready? Well, here's what Canon says. They say Canon is working on field tests for this camera and will support capturing definitive and impactful moments at international sporting events to be held in the near future. What could those be? be? Is there like a ping pong? It's the Olympics, right? It's weird that they don't say we're getting ready for the Olympics, but that's probably some trademark thing. They'd probably have to have an official agreement with the Olympics in order just to say we're getting ready for we're going to be at the Olympics. But that's what that means. The R1 is definitely going to be at the Olympics, and I'm really excited to see the results that it can produce. This announcement is a little weird to me. Like, first, why did they announce it at all? Sony did not do a previous announcement of the A9 Mark III sports camera when they launched it. They just brought all the influencers together and bam, here it is, put it in our hands, showed it off. Everything was ready. Now, Nikon did an announcement of the Z9 beforehand. Nikon did that announcement because Nikon was behind Sony at the time. Nikon did not have a flagship. Sony did in that 12-month gap that was 2021. By making an announcement early, Nikon was saying, wait, loyal Nikon shooters, don't jump ship just yet. We have something coming for you. Just wait for it. And I think that is what Canon is doing. Canon is saying, we'll have something coming. It's not ready right this minute, but hold your horses. It's going to be here soon. Now, Nikon pretty quickly after their initial announcement wanted to wow us with what the Z9 was going to be. So they announced a bunch of cool specs, you know, like 120 frames per second, like 30 frames per second, JPEG full megapixel, and 8K 60 frames per second. And that got people pumped because it had specs that other cameras didn't have. I know Canon wants us to be pumped. So it's weird to me that they didn't announce any specs, because to me that either means they're just matching parity with what we currently have with the A9 Mark III and they don't want us to be disappointed, or maybe they want to keep it secret and they don't want to give the competition any advance notice of how they're raising the bar. I certainly hope the latter is the case, because for Canon to continue to thrive here, they need to outdo the Z9 and the A1, and I'm not sure they're going to do it. But I sure do hope they do, because if nothing else, that's going to make it interesting, and competition is good for everybody. In the comments down below, I'd love to hear what you think. Like, what do you think the megapixels are going to be? I'm thinking 24 to 30 megapixels. I'm thinking it's going to be a low megapixel camera, not appropriate, not ideal for wildlife photography, but good for sports photography where smaller images are good enough and move around faster. I'm thinking the frames per second has got to match the A9 Mark III. It's got to be 120 frames per second. But I'd be shocked if they didn't want to up the ante and go to at least 200 frames per second. But honestly, I don't care. Like 120 frames per second is like too much. Like 30 is great. 60 is useful sometimes. Even in fast sports, like 120 is like, that's a lot to go through. In my own personal experience working with the Z8, the Z9, and the A9 Mark III. Will it have a global shutter? I don't think it will, but I think it's going to be okay. What's the flash sync speed going to be? Because that was a big part of the A9 Mark III's marketing, was unlimited flash sync speed. They could get a good flash sync speed by just having a quick readout or by having a really good mechanical shutter, but we don't know the details yet. I'm sure it's going to be at least 1/250th, but I'm hoping at least 1/400th like the A1 has. Did Canon make their quad pixel autofocus development? That would require a new sensor, which this one has, and it probably wouldn't work with the global shutter, so that might have been a compromise that they make. But they did mention some autofocus improvements without saying quad pixel autofocus. They did mention specific processors they were using without mentioning quad pixel autofocus. So my guess is they didn't actually succeed in including that. We're probably not getting QPAF. Will it have GPS like the R3, like the Z9? And I sure hope so. They didn't mention that, but the form factor is large, significantly bigger than the R3. So I think part of that is going to be an integrated GPS unit. What about the rear screen? Is it the same old rear screen, or are they finally giving us like a nice bright OLED? That's something that pros really want. My impression is I have a hunch they're going to give us a new, better screen that we can see in the sun. But I'm thinking it's probably not going to be a flip screen. I'm thinking it's probably going to be integrated directly into the back. You know, even as I say that, it doesn't feel right. Maybe Canon is just going to give us a flip screen like they did on the R3. Write a comment down below. What do you think? And this is a real reach, but will Canon finally give us some cellular connectivity, something like 5G connections? That's something a lot of pros need when they're on location but don't necessarily have a Wi-Fi access point. It would simplify and eliminate things, and Sony's come up with some novel solutions for that with their cameras, so it's clearly something all the manufacturers are working towards. What do you think? Is the R1 exciting, or is it disappointing? Is it too late? Let me know in the comments down below, and subscribe. We'll have a review for you as soon as a copy is available to us. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Squarespace. Start at squarespace.com/Tony and see how easy it is to set up a beautiful web presence. Once you decide to sign up, use the coupon code Tony and you'll get 10% off. And at that point, you can get yourself a custom domain name, whatever you can think of if it's still available. Create a whole brand for yourself while you're at it. You know, logos, custom colors, fonts. You create a style that matches whatever your project is, whether it's your professional photography portfolio or a video reel or anything else. Squarespace is ready for you. So once again, start here, use this coupon code, and I can't wait to see what you make. Thanks, bye.